Thus far, the Royal Bahamas Police Force has confirmed that there are 5 deaths in Abaco. Teams will go to Abaco as soon as possible for full and proper assessment and identification.
It's just absolutely horrific what happened to the northern Bahamas. And as of 8 a.m., the eye wall of Dorian will have pounded Grand Bahama Island for 36 straight hours. As of 9:30, assuming that southern eye wall still holds and doesn't move, Dorian's eye wall would have pounded the northwest Bahamas, we're talking Abacos and over, for 48 straight hours. Remember, it made 3 landfalls, all 3 as a Category 5. Now, taking aim here on the lower 48. I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams. I'm live in Tybee Island. These are the beaches. We're at low tide. Our high tide is not until just after noon, and that will be the case as we head into tomorrow. Tomorrow is when we will see our water get the highest. So let's talk about its track. Now, it's been sitting over the same area, and what happens is it's something called upwelling. If you haven't heard of that term before, it's sitting over the water, right? And it's using up all that nice warm water on the top, and cooler water comes up to replace it. That's upwelling. And that is not conducive for a tropical cyclone. Now, we've seen that eye wall collapse. You got to watch the satellite. And that eye wall just falls apart at the end. Now, it's also interacting with some systems in the atmosphere that are helping tear it apart that we will detail coming up. But let's show you that path. You'll see, with all that said, the winds are going to go down between the upwelling, the fast forward speed, and even the systems tearing it apart. Now, even though it is going into technically some warmer water, it's not all about the warm water. Offshore here, we're about 83 degrees. You know, you have that Gulf Stream water, it's nice and warm. But if the dynamics around the system, it's running into a lot of dry air as well, are not conducive, then sometimes it doesn't matter how hot the water is, but that usually does help fuel these storms. We have the storm surge, warnings in Florida. We have them here in Georgia as well, storm surge watches in South Carolina, hurricane watches and warnings. Those will basically be for those bands coming around, maybe gusts 40, 50 miles an hour in some of those thunderstorms. And it is going to stay east of Matthew's path, which is good news. It will be weaker than Matthew as well. When Matthew was coming up the coast, that outer eye wall was basically just raking the coast, and it was a Cat 3. The main eye wall of Matthew stayed offshore. And Jim, it just doesn't even look like we're going to see any part of the eye wall, especially since that west side is also dry as well, eating away at it. So this is really best case scenario for Florida. Although the beaches and whatnot, we still are going to see erosion, and we have seen that.
Right. I just showed you that. I showed you what happened to that driveway. I showed you that sand was halfway up somebody's door into their building there. And now I'm over on the Jensen Beach Causeway, okay, on the mainland side. And we just had one hell of a squall come through here. And with that, winds 50, 60 miles per hour easy in some of the gusts. Now that the rain is cleared, you can see behind me here just how agitated the intercoastal waterway is. All right, lots of water, lots of splash up here on the shore. We got a boat obviously anchored out. Actually, there's a couple of them from what I can see at this point in time. But, you can get, it doesn't matter how big the body of water is. If you've got big wind over that water, you're going to create waves. In some cases, big waves. What's really interesting here is, we're kind of on the open and wind side of the intercoastal. You get on the other side of the causeway, and there's hardly any waves because this big bridge that we're under is actually blocking it. So you can see what's happening in through here. From what I can see, especially down along the mainland, I don't see any of this splash up coming over people's docks or into their backyards. It's really right here where we've essentially got wind perpendicular to the causeway or at a 90-degree angle. So here's the causeway here, here's the wind direction, and it's piling up the water right here. And that's why you're seeing the splash up on the rocks over here. But either way, that is one heck of an agitated intercoastal waterway, that's for sure. Guys, just like we talked about all morning and even yesterday, the worst winds are going to be with the bands. When the bands come in, they're going to help to unleash the power of that hurricane on down. And that will be, of course, where we get the strongest winds and the heaviest downpours. And if you're driving along, you're going to have to slow down, all right, because these downpours are 2-3 inches an hour, instantaneous rain coming down to the point where your fastest speeds on your windshield washers. Wipers are not even going to be able to keep up with this. Again, in and out has gone this particular band. There will be others. This is certainly where we're expecting some of the worst weather today here on the Martin County coast, on the intercoastal, on the beaches, Hutchinson Island, and we've seen the erosion issues. High tides at 2:55 this afternoon. It'll be interesting to see where our wind now has gone a little bit more northerly. Does that help us at that high tide? It's certainly possible, but I certainly think the water's going to come up, and the wave action that's already coming out, propagating out from this hurricane will be an issue. The storm is still just off to our east-southeast, so wave propagation is going to be toward the beaches. We're still going to have issues there. All right, guys, much more to come with our continuing coverage of Dorian. What are the hurricane hunters going to find when they get out there? Probably a weaker storm. We should have their latest advisory coming up in just a moment. Stick around.
Just incredible to see that. Wow, that's the second floor. You're getting waves crashing. The video out of there has been just shocking and jaw-dropping and, of course, devastating, as 5 people have lost their lives in the Bahamas on Abaco due to this storm. The first victims and those injured by Dorian arrived in Nassau, Bahamas on Monday. The U.S. Coast Guard left from Miami to pick up those injured in Abaco. At least 5 people in the Abaco Island, including a 7-year-old boy. His sister still remains missing this morning. There was also a death in Puerto Rico and in Florida as well. This has now been sitting off the northern part of Grand Bahama Island for hours upon hours. Now, I want you to notice, though, nice concentric eye wall at the beginning of this satellite frame, and watch at the end, it falls apart. We don't really even have an eye wall. We have a little pin needle. That is good news. That means that this is weakening. And again, it is finally moving northwest at 1 mile an hour. We've also seen the pressure go up a little bit. We were 950 at our last advisory. We're now at 952. So this is good news for Florida and good news for the Bahamas that is finally pulling away. But I'm telling you that water is still very high for some of those communities in the Bahamas, because it's all about the wind field pushing that water for you. Hurricane watches and warnings still stand along the Florida coast. Same with tropical storm watches and warnings. And now we have hurricane watches along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, and tropical storm watches as you go a little bit farther inland. It'll finally race off, because right now it's stuck in between 2 high pressures, and that's why it really wasn't moving. But little trough to the north giving it a tug, and a second bigger trough will come in and pull it and race it away. I mean, look how Wednesday evening it's still basically Florida, Georgia-ish, and then it races away. So here's what we knew, the latest numbers for you. 7 deaths are now linked to Dorian, 5 in the Bahamas, 1 in Florida, 1 in Puerto Rico. Some 3 million coastal residents are under evacuation orders in 4 southern states: Florida, Georgia, and also North and South Carolina. Orlando International shut down operations at 2 o'clock this morning, and the visitors complex at Kennedy Space Center remains closed to tourists for a second day. We're going to go to the gym in just 1 minute, but I want to show you real quick what it looks like here. And of course, our worst weather will be as we head basically later in the day on Wednesday into Thursday. You can see where the debris came up from our high tide earlier this morning. We're at low tide, and it is a wide, expansive beach. I should say low tide hit just before 6 a.m., but we're low for all intent and purposes. And, you know, this will obviously look different as Dorian nears us. The good news is our forecast for our water rise is about 2 feet below, at least at Fort Pulaski, I should say, 2 feet below what it was for Matthew. So not only is it going to ride east of Matthew, Jim, it's not going to be as strong as Matthew. And those are 2 really good points for the entire southeast coast. But hey, Wilmington, North Carolina, they actually could feel the worst effects that the whole U.S. is going to get from this system.
Yeah, we don't want to take Wilmington out yet. We don't want to take the Outer Banks out, the Tidewater area of Virginia, in terms of, you know, some of the worst impacts with this. None of the consensus guidance brings this on shore, okay? We should note that. That has been the track the Hurricane Center has been following in through here. It'll be interesting to see, you know, once we get a drop from that plane, how much weaker this hurricane actually is. But certainly from satellite presentation and what we've seen now, that the storm surge heights on the east coast of Florida have come down now to 3 to 5 feet versus 4 to 7. And remember, even those forecasts are for a worse case scenario. All right, so all this is so far for Florida very good news, but obviously our hearts are in the Bahamas. I mean, no question about it. Let's take a look at this. You can see the winds along the coast. Again, 20 miles an hour in terms of sustain, but when those squalls come in, we're gusting 50, 60. It's that simple, and that's going to be the worst of it. If you're driving along, I don't care how fast your windshield wipers are, they're not going to be able to keep up with the kind of rainfall rates that we had. You can see the reports, some of them that have been along the coast, 40, 50, even 60 miles per hour much earlier at Juno Beach when one of those squalls came through. But given the position and given the fact that it's moving now to the north, we probably won't see, and none of the guidance suggests, any closer approach to the coast of Florida. So that is obviously good news, and that's why I was saying this morning, what you see is what you get here in Martin County and South Florida. And by this evening, I think a lot of us can start breathing a little sigh of relief. We got to get through high tide. All right, that's going to be an issue. It always has been. We saw the erosion at the homes on MacArthur Causeway there, so not surprising. If you're right on the water there, you're going to deal with the impacts. This is the intercoastal behind me. This is not the ocean. So we've come across from the barrier island now toward the mainland, and this is the intercoastal waterway, and you can see what a wash tub this is behind me and through here. Now, what'll be interesting is at high tide this afternoon, especially if the winds pick up even a little bit, we're going to add a foot and a half to where the water level is right now. And so we may be splashed. We may not be able to stand where I'm standing right here. So again, as I mentioned, tides for Florida coast have dropped. Storm tides down to 3 to 5 feet. Great news there. Radar presentation continues to look, not as impressive. Certainly, we're still getting hammered. The worst weather is still in Grand Bahama Island. Even though we've come down 60 miles per hour, you've still got such an incredible power with that wind. And imagine going through that for 24, 36 hours. It's just relentless wind, seeing the water come up to second floors. I mean, just horrible situations there. So Daytona, again, surge up to 5 feet. We're going to lower that. The worst impacts will be tonight for Daytona Beach, the Space Coast, and the First Coast tonight into tomorrow morning. And then it gets up towards Stephanie as we work our way toward tomorrow. So, Steph, again, planning for the worst. And you know as well as I do, once you put that contraflow into motion, you can't just turn it off. You can't just turn it off.
You can't. You absolutely can't, Jim. Let's talk more about what this did in the Bahamas. Just absolutely devastating. I mean, it was sitting over the Bahamas 36 to 48 hours. For a big chunk of that, it was a Category 5. And of course, it came very near to the Bahamas' second largest city, which is Freeport. But they still, even though they didn't get the strongest winds, they got crushed by the surge. Winds whistled, waves whipped.
Our garage door has already come off and it's floating in this very high water.
Dorian waging an all-day assault on Freeport Monday.
That's the water hitting my frontal window, which is extremely high.
That's the Bahamas agricultural minister.
This is the water by my back door.
He says the sea climbed 20 to 25 feet to reach his home on Grand Bahama Island. The Bahamian prime minister says it's like fighting a war and the enemy has all the weapons.
We have absolutely nothing. We're hopeless. The only thing we have to us is God.
On Great Abaco Island,
complete devastation. Look at these cars, man.
Destruction in the town of Marsh Harbor. Catastrophic. The early estimates are 13,000 homes damaged or destroyed in the Bahamas' northern islands.
Storm came and then all communication was lost at this time. Nothing.
Just east of Great Abaco, Jessica Mullen's house on Elbow Cay stood up to Dorian's 185-mile-an-hour winds.
Every room in this house has the windows blown out except for the one we stayed in.
But the storm trashed the inside. Outside, Jessica discovered the Bahamas' lush tropical landscape stripped of anything green.
Oh my God.
And we want to take you live now to Freeport and show you what it looks like. Again, still feeling the effects of this hurricane because it's just off to the north. So there you have the clouds, and look at the trees. They look pretty stripped, don't they? And can you imagine Freeport didn't even get the strongest winds, and they still got hammered. I mean, we had 5 feet of water at the airport. So that just shows you, I mean, yes, the eye walls are worse, but being in a Cat 5, just absolutely tremendous. Now, members of the U.S. Coast Guard stationed in Clearwater, Florida, are helping the Bahamas. Helicopters evacuated 19 patients from Marsh Harbor, which is where one of the 3 landfalls occurred. The Coast Guard plans to help with search and rescue as conditions permit. Now, of course, everyone's preparing in Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina as this finally has at least a little movement northwest at 1 mile an hour. It's going to be slow today, even tomorrow. Then it's going to pick up speed. Here we take you into Hilton Head, South Carolina, where people are taking precautions on Monday. They spent the day boarding up storefronts, doors, windows ahead of this monstrous storm. Residents in Hilton Head are worried and sending their thoughts to those in the Bahamas that were hit hard by Dorian.
Got to pray for those people. I mean, we've been to Green Turtle Key, which is right there in Abaco, and there's a lot of poverty there. There's a lot of homes that are not well constructed, so God be with them.
So what exactly is going to get this system moving, and why has it been so slow over Grand Bahama? Well, if you look at the steering currents, that's actually what pushes and pulls a hurricane. A hurricane is small relative to our high and low pressures. So high pressure off to the east wants to push it north because it has a clockwise flow. High pressure to the west wants to push it south because it has a clockwise flow. So it's getting torn up a little bit by that, and that's why it was stuck, or one of the reasons it was stuck. Now, if you look at the water vapor imagery, we have one little trough coming through now. That's delivering very dry air to the southeast and the northern part of this storm. It's feeling that, but do you see where that circle is? That's actually the big trough that's going to pick this up and move it and get it out of here. It's already all the way in South Dakota, but it'll dive down. Don't worry, it's not going to miss it. All right, so don't stress out about that. So we have our 2 highs and our trough, and it's good that we have those 2 highs on either side because that will help tear this apart a little bit. And the exact track again into the South Carolina, North Carolina, it's still unknown. But at least we're going to be east of Matthew, which is good news, right, for the bulk of the trip of this system. And all the models do have it going out to sea. Its closest approach will be Wilmington, where Jen is located. And, of course, she will continue to stay throughout the duration of the storm. So it's going to be right along the coast where you have the strongest winds and the biggest issues. That's why we have hurricane watches posted here, Georgia, South Carolina. Watch out for those bands to come in. But again, our water rise here is still forecast, at least at Fort Pulaski Gauge near Savannah, to be 2 feet, about 2 feet below what Matthew was. And we can show you the timing of it coming up. Tomorrow, it's still going to be pretty quiet overall, at least in the morning. Today, it will be fine. And then as the system's coming up the coast, I mean, you can see that timing. Finally, on Wednesday, it gets in. Thursday, it's basically out of this area, and it races off. The other good thing about Thursday is because we'll be on the backside of the system, that's going to push all the water out. So that is a positive of getting past this and being on the backside of it. But how's it going to affect places like Wilmington? Let's go to Jen Carfagno to find out how they are preparing for this. Today, Jen, some voluntary evacuations. Have you seen anyone boarding up or thinking about boarding up?
Yeah, you know what, Steph, I've seen no one making any preparations actually here visually like that, no boarding up. I got into town late last night, though, but I think what people are doing is really preparing to shelter in place. They're preparing for power outages. You know, after just a year ago having gone through Florence, people know what it's like to be without power for quite some time. And I think everyone is going to prepare a little bit differently this time. Here's what one woman had to say.
So during the hurricane, the hospital usually requires employees to either be prepared to come in before the storm, during the storm, or after the storm. So last year we were both during the storm required to be there. This year we're both on the after team, which means once they've lifted the ban, employees that have been there on lockdown get to return to their homes, and then the ones that are prepared for the after storm need to replace the teams that have been there on lockdown for that time.
Yeah, and of course, you learn something from every storm, and every storm is different, too. This will be a much different situation. As we look at the forecast here, we anticipate tropical storm force conditions by later tomorrow, with hurricane force conditions potentially on Thursday. That will be the worst weather day for us. And today is a day to prepare. Behind me, we've got the U.S. Coast Guard cutter diligence. And that's right here in port. Here, I understand it spends about 185 days out at sea every year. But it's here. They're getting ready just in case. They have no orders just yet, from what I understand as well. But certainly making preparations, as everyone needs to be today. Something else I really want to point out about preparations. We've got a crane, a huge crane here. A lot of building going on in downtown Wilmington, as there are in cities all across the Southeast. Looks like some mixed-use buildings going up, condos with some business underneath, and a crane on top that they will be taking down today. Now, this was up last year before Florence. They took it down before Florence, and then they put it back up again. It still needs to be up for about another month or so. So they'll spend most of today, and if not some of tomorrow here. It's a big project to take it down. I got a little lesson in how they'll take it down in pieces, starting at the very top, taking down those pendant lines, and then taking off some of the weight to, counteract some of the balance as they take off some of the end of the arm of the crane, and then it will be an all-day project, and I think about 18 to 20 loads on tractor trailers that have to be taken out of here from that, and then brought back in after the storm, actually, so they can continue construction. So a big undertaking, but you have to prepare for the worst-case scenario, Jim. And I'm glad to see they're taking it very seriously, because a viable track, Jim, is for us to get the core of Dorian to come over this way. The official track is just offshore, but we know that there's error in that, 2-day track.
All right, Jen, we're talking about certainly what's going on and through here and how we're going to plan our afternoon. We're probably going to stay right here at the high tide because you're talking about another 1.5 feet. We will talk to a coastal engineer, Kathy Fitzpatrick, about this area next.
Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need.
I wish I could shake your hand.
Granted. Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, liberty, liberty.
The wave and surge is now pushing north toward the Space Coast and eventually up toward the Golden Isles of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, where you guys are doing repairs, and you had contraflow earlier this morning in Georgia. So, your preparations are continuing to get underway there, as they should, because this thing could still kind of jog eerily close to Morehead City, an area that went under hurricane watch this morning. So that's what we're looking at right now, guys. It's interesting because even though this wave action is huge and the clouds are pretty thick off to my north, you look onto the other side of the causeway and there's actually some breaks in the clouds, but it's still very, very windy here. Winds, again, sustained at times, 45 miles an hour, occasionally gusting over 50, especially when the rain squalls come in, because those are going to bring down the big part of the hurricane. All right, Jason, can I throw to Postel right now? I got a question for him. Carl Parker. Okay, Carl. Yeah, so Postel's off. I've lost track of time. We've done so much this morning. Carl, this morning we watched the western end of this kind of void of precipitation a little bit. There seemed to be a bigger batch and a little bit more organization to the northern and the northeastern side of the storm.
Yeah.
Do you think that whole area has a chance of pivoting around toward the Space Coast and the first coast of Florida as we get into this evening and tonight?
Well, I think it will, gradually come around to the west side of the storm, but whether or not it actually makes it onshore, that's a difficult question at this point, especially if you're starting to get a little bit of drier air coming off the land there. So in general, we just have not seen as much weather now coming into the west coast. But as you mentioned, there are those showers. And within those showers, we get some pretty gusty winds. We got a report of winds gusting well over 50 miles an hour in Port Canaveral. So I think that's probably what we're in for the duration. It's going to be tropical storm force winds and gusts here. It doesn't look like we're going to get into hurricane force winds, but certainly that onshore push is a concern in all the water piling up and the storm surge. I think that's going to be one of the bigger worries going forward, Jim.
And Carl, as you see this moving to the north, is there a way is there something we don't see in terms of the intensity? In other words, is there any way it could go up in intensity, or are there just too many negatives now? The sheer only is to go up from this point. The dry air only intruding more so than it is. So really most signals give us a weakening storm, if you will.
Yeah,
right?
you know, I think that that's true. That
something, you know, that we're going to continue to see certainly as we go on in time. And these are both really important things, okay? Guys, seriously, there's something to be said for a Cat 2 hurricane moving through your area versus a Category 5 like we've just seen in Grand Bahama, sitting there, crawling. In most cases, everyone on the planet who can walks very much faster than this hurricane was moving. So, yeah, Carl, we've seen this with Florence. We saw it with Harvey. We saw it with Barry to an extent. It was just out over the water, and now we've seen it with Dorian. Underneath this walkway, there's kind of a park here under the Gentian Bridge Causeway, which is above me, and you know, boats can travel through here without the bridge even opening. Obviously there's a size limit, but what a difference between this side, all right, and then going over here, and really what is looking like something that is a blender is creating right here. I mean, just incredible. Of course, you see the splash up that we have. We still haven't gotten to high tide yet, so the water's still rising. So that means some of these waves on this side are going to be a lot worse. The big difference today for us, especially on the ocean side, all right, is the winds are out of the northwest now, even West Palm. Northwest, gusts to 30 knots or so from time to time. The strongest winds are on the beaches here. We're about 45, gusting to 50, especially when these squalls come in, and we've got another one coming right now. So that's what's creating, you know, some of the worst wind conditions, and will continue to do so. Does this pivot up toward Cape Canaveral? Do we get, you know, don't be surprised to get gusts to 60 there. Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, St. Augustine. I think the issues for St. Augustine could get interesting, because we're going to bring up a pretty large swell, a pretty decent water rise tonight at high tide, and it's going to be kind of concurrent with the moving or the propagating hurricane. So that'll be something pretty interesting to watch, I think, there, because they can flood. The St. John's River can flood. It'll come up as well, especially with this king tide going on in through here. So big rain going on, docile waves as you go to the other side of the intercoastal waterway. All right, let's find out what's going on in Savannah. Big day for Georgia, Felicia Combs, as they do something they rarely do and turn both interstates around to go northbound when one of them clearly would go southbound on a normal day. How'd that go?
Yeah, you know, from the reports that I'm hearing, they reversed I-16. They got that contraflow going this morning around 8 a.m., and it has been much smoother sailing. People have been following this evacuation order, and we are here at the evacuation assembly area in Savannah at the Civic Center, and things have been flowing really smoothly here. I will tell you, they have this process down to just a T. They are getting people in, they're getting people out, and they've already got now around 800 people. They say they're prepared for about 2,000, and most importantly, most of the people in the Savannah area, you need to know, usually they do this for 2 days. Today is the only day they're doing it, so if you need to get out, the sooner the better. Go ahead and get here. I'm actually here with a lifelong Savannah resident, Dietrich Leggett, and tell me a little bit about...
Be rescued, and nobody could get to them. in that kind of water. Just horrible images and thought. I mean, it makes me sick to even talk about it. So that's the calling card of Dorian, no question about it. Nothing will compare in the United States as to what happened there, not even close. By the way, Carl, maybe it was you who texted me, I'm not really sure, but we got an answer on the damage. I was asking Carl earlier, what's the change? In other words, the winds I have here at 50 versus the 185 that they had in Abaco and Grand Bahama. The strength, the power is about 1,400 times stronger.
Wow.
And that's pretty incredible. That's a pretty incredible change, no question about that. All right, again, guys, looking out here, you can certainly see the intercoastal waterway, just absolutely like a wash tub out and through here. We're getting closer to high tide, so the water's still coming up. But I showed you earlier under the bridge, under the Jensen Beach Bridge, you go on the other side where this is kind of a brick walkover, and it's pretty flat. There's no wave action like this. So this is strictly, you know, the waves here coming up toward the bridge, which is it's perpendicular to the wave action, and the wind, of course, is pushing all this water up this way, but then it's pretty docile once you get onto the other side. Water flows through it, but not these waves because of the brick structure. So that's at least dampening things down. Other than that, we still have power as far as the eye can see. The city is shut down. West Palm Beach Airport was going to open at 3. They will not be. Okay, so they're down until further notice. So if you have a flight that you were expecting this afternoon, you may not get it simply because they have not announced a reopening. It may be tomorrow, it may be later tonight, who knows. But right now we're dealing with some of the strongest winds that are offshore here from the northwest at about 30 knots or so, with gusts that are even higher than that. Strongest winds. All right, so I'm just hearing word that the bridges have been opened. Which bridges are these, Jason? Are these the bridges here in Martin County? These bridges. Okay. So yeah, good news. They've opened the causeway now. So earlier on, you'd come up to the causeway from the mainland side, which is over there. Okay, and you'd be stopped by police, and they wouldn't let you get across unless you were a resident or had some type of special request to get over there. But now I'm understanding that the bridges are opening. Hopefully the airport will follow suit. Hopefully other things in Martin County will follow suit. Again, the storm is east or just northeast of us at the present time. And you can see, certainly the waves that are still going on with the tremendous wind that we have behind us. All right, all of this energy is moving up the coast, and that's what we're going to do with our coverage here. I want to go to Vero Beach. That's where Tevin Wooten is. Tevin, you too will deal with another high tide this afternoon. So I have a kind of a two-part question for you here. Number one, what have the waves done at high tide cycle so far? And what do you anticipate? Do you think it'll be worse as you go to this afternoon?
Yeah, so Jim, we actually just had high tide right about 2 hours ago, closer to 3 hours ago now, here on Vero Beach. We're on the barrier island, and let me tell you, with the wind speed from Dorian about 100 miles east-southeast, coupled with this wave action, I mean, that has started to erode some of the beach here, some of the sand. In fact, I would say no beach right now in terms of the water, because it's coming up closer towards the seawall. This is an 8-foot high seawall here. So had this seawall not been here, the water would have started to approach or encroach closer and closer to Ocean Drive. And Jim, do forgive me, I cannot remember. Oh, the second part of your question, that was what about later on this afternoon in terms of the forecast? Well, the next high tide closer to 5 o'clock this afternoon, I do actually anticipate the winds from Dorian to increase as we get into the afternoon. So more wind energy, more wave action here on Vero Beach. I mean, this is just absolutely incredible. This is the strongest activity I have seen thus far. Our coverage started late last week. We still continue today here on the Weather Channel. It feels almost like acupuncture because of the force of the rain with the winds coming in. That's the latest here in Vero Beach. We, of course, have this storm coverage covering up in just a bit.
Hurricanes, we've seen a lot of these over the past several years, and we've had our fifth Category 5 hurricane in the last 4 years. So does this mean something otherworldly is going on? I don't know. But it's something to watch because it's a trend. 40 years in meteorology is a trend, 30 years, 100 years, 10,000 years. These are all, periods of climate, certainly once you get past 10 years, that we can keep an eye on. All right, guys, again, the good news here in Florida, things are slowly starting to come back online. We saw that earlier today at Fort Lauderdale. Miami Airport is open. West Palm, no word, even though the causeway that I'm standing under is now open. So they're starting to open the bridges here in Martin County. And that's what we're hearing, and that is obviously good news. That kind of tells you that officials are thinking, this is getting past the point where we're not dealing with the worst of this anymore. Stick around, guys. Unfortunately, Dorian about into the first quarter of a 4-quarter football game.
For the locals, I hope that it doesn't come because it could be, catastrophic. And this is such a beautiful place. We just bought a home here, so I like it to stay put.
Should you stay or should you go? That's the question for a lot of people along the Atlantic coast. Dorian's category may be down, but the Atlantic coast still not out of it just yet. Welcome back into the Weather Channel's continuing coverage of Hurricane Dorian. The reason why we are not done with this just yet, the winds, the storm surge, the waves, and the rain too. In fact, occasionally we get an outer band coming in from behind this way. This is from the north and northeast predominantly. But look at the way these waves are crashing in along the beach here in Vero Beach, and let me tell you something, this is certainly the strongest activity we've seen thus far. Now, where is the storm? It's still about 100 miles east-southeast in terms of the center, but that does not mean we can't see impacts. In fact, we're seeing that right now. I'm looking at some of these dunes. I'm looking at the sand being eroded with each passing wave that comes in. It crashes into the seawall, which is about 8 feet high, and thank goodness it's 8 feet high because there would certainly be a lot more water this way, but that is not the case, at least here. We have heard reports of maybe other businesses down the stretch that may be impacted in terms of the undercarriage and water coming closer towards their front doors or maybe even their decks or balconies as well. What about the city here in Vero Beach in Indian River County? Well, they did open shelters just a few days ago. 751 people did use 6 of those shelters. No word on whether that number has gone up or gone down. We do know the bridges and causeways between the barrier island where we are and the mainland, those have reopened as of about 3 hours ago. They closed last night at midnight. There's that potential that those could close again if the winds exceed tropical storm force. We have certainly seen that. I think we've seen gusts higher than that, but it does take sustained winds at 39 miles an hour. That's certainly a possibility as we get into tonight. The storm, again, 100 miles east-southeast, but as it moves towards the northwest, almost at a crawl, not 1 mile an hour like we saw earlier today and last night, but as it does move north, do anticipate the winds to pick up. Do anticipate the wave action to pick up even more. And if that happens with high tide, Carl, you know what that means. That means more water closer and closer towards the shore, and that could potentially impact people here in Vero Beach. Carl.
Yeah, going to be a really tough time along the beaches there in Florida next couple of days. Tevin, thank you so much. We want to tell you about a new tropical storm in the Atlantic Basin in the Gulf of Mexico. Tropical Storm Fernand has just been named by the National Hurricane Center, now moving west at 7 miles per hour, about 160 miles east of La Pesa in Mexico, and will continue off towards the west, most likely coming perhaps very close to the Rio Grande Valley. Here's a look at the forecast track and intensities. It's not going to have a whole lot of time out over the open water, most likely approaching the coast tomorrow morning and then beginning to move inland going into Thursday. So at this point, it appears that it's going to be primarily, if anything, a rain threat in deep South Texas, but of course we'll continue to keep a very close eye on that. Latest on Hurricane Dorian, now a Category 2 storm with winds of 110 miles per hour. I want to show you a satellite picture here, show you where the convection is or the deep thunderstorms relative to the center. These are not official numbers. I'm just sort of eyeballing this here. You extend out to the east and they go out good 125 miles, and out to the west, it's about half that distance. And what's interesting about this is If you look at the water vapor imagery, you notice here that there is this advection, as we call it. There's some sinking air and also some drier air that is being brought down by that larger circulation of the hurricane. You can see that deeper orange color. Notice how that starts there in northern Florida and just sags southward just like that. Well, that's important because as those storms, as that weather is rotating around into the west side of the circulation, it's encountering that drier air and having a harder time sustaining itself. So that's going to make it a little more difficult to get really strong winds along the coast. At this point, we don't think there's going to be a whole lot of hurricane force wind, maybe some gusts to that strength, but certainly tropical storm force winds will be the story. And of course, driving all that wave action and water into the coast, and a 4 to 7 foot surge will be possible along the coast. Now, down the road, as we look at the Carolinas, again, we see something similar. There's a lot of dry, I mean, look at that orange. Look at all the orange right in there. There's a tremendous amount of dry air. So even though the storm is going to come up and along the coast, and eventually the core may come right across North Carolina, there's so much dry air there that's probably going to keep a lot of the weather offshore. It's going to be a little harder to bring the weather onshore as a result of that. So more immediately, again, the tropical storm force winds getting involved with the coastline here, but that onshore flow driving down into northeast part of Florida and into Jacksonville. And so we're going to be looking at certainly some potential for storm surge. And new advisory on Hurricane Dorian, everything is the same. Much more on the storm coming up.
Our mission and focus now is search, rescue, and recovery. I ask for your prayers for those in affected areas and for our first responders.
And for the first time in 96 plus hours, we are below major hurricane status with Dorian. The new advisory in from the National Hurricane Center, 110, Cat 2, moving northwest at 5 miles an hour, essentially paralleling the Florida coast. It'll probably make its closest approach to Cape Canaveral a little bit later on this evening. But that will be it for Florida. No question it's going to stay off the coast at this point, and then start its turn onto the northeast with more acceleration as it heads up towards South Carolina and also North Carolina, with impacts of wind, surge, and water rise and beach erosion. Those are all still very valid. All right? Everything's behaving the way we expected it to be. And for Florida, you can see we're still in this big time with the winds now northwest. So they're offshore here in Martin County. Palm Beach Airport is closed. Fort Lauderdale is open. Miami is open. Orlando is closed. Daytona Beach is closed. Make sure you call your carrier for heading on out. So the good news is we got a weakening hurricane. The bad news is we've also got a lot of impacts to go. I mentioned earlier before we went to break that we were really in the first quarter of this thing. Now we started about the first 5 minutes of the second quarter, all right? And by the time tomorrow morning rolls around, we'll probably be in halftime. And then we go into, Thursday or Wednesday and Thursday and deal with it again up the Carolina coast. Guys, I got to be honest with you, in all my coverage, here's something I never, ever thought I would see. We just shot this. My producer, Trish Ragsdale, went out and shot this because we couldn't believe our eyes. All right, we couldn't believe that a boat was coming across the intercoastal and making its way toward the bridge. And you can see what happened once he got to the other side of the bridge, or close to the other side. Yeah, the wave action was huge, and look at the turning around, almost capsized the boat. So don't know why they were out there in the first place. It's still windy. Granted, the water's a lot docile. More docile on the other side of this bridge than it is certainly on this side. And the reason for that is because this is kind of a park here under the Jensen Beach Causeway. You can walk underneath the causeway all the way to the other side, all right? Or up to the point where there's a break that the boats can come through. But, you can walk on each side of that up to that point. But the waves, as you can see behind me here, are so much more different than we got. Rain squalls continue to come in here. That's where we get our strongest winds. They've been consistently gusting to 50 miles per hour. When they're not, they're sitting there around Stewart Beach at 20, 30 miles an hour. They're actually less than they were this morning because our winds have changed to offshore. So there's actually a little shadowing of the wind from the land that's going on. They're not as strong, even though in the squalls they certainly are, and they will be. The farther north you go, let's say Cape Canaveral, up towards St. Augustine, Jacksonville, winds are still onshore. So they're on the northwest side of the circulation, and they're going to get stronger. The water's going to come up as well. Again, we're past high tide there, so it's going to go down. So it'll really be the next high tide cycle. That'll be the big test for St. Augustine, for Jacksonville, for the St. Johns River before tomorrow morning your winds too begin to slowly work their way offshore. So we still got a long way to go with this, unfortunately, and there may be a chance where the closest approach of all will be, let's say, up toward Morehead City in North Carolina. So Wilmington kind of jets out a little bit, then you go up toward Morehead City and then out toward the Ocracoke and the Outer Banks, which have started evacuation process. They're where they were certainly a couple of days ago here in Florida, up in North Carolina. We've heard each respective governor talk about their procedures today, which started this morning at 8 a.m. with the contraflow in the state of Georgia. All right, let's get Carl Parker's thinking. He's a hurricane specialist at the Weather Channel and certainly has had great insight in all of our storms of many, many years, Carl. And again, just a personal thank you for our discussion at the top of the last hour. I thought that was wonderful to actually have the time to discuss these things and some of the trends that we're seeing in the tropics. But let's talk about this advisory. I mean, certainly we can breathe a little easier when we see the intensity come down. But do you see anything where the wind field itself is expanding? Or has that ceased?
Yeah, well, it has been certainly this morning. Ever since we saw that eye wall replacement cycle, we've seen that gradual expansion. Right now we're looking at this big shield of more intense convection. It's still about 45 miles offshore, and I wonder if it's going to be having a more difficult time making it onshore, Jim, because we've just got a fair amount of dry air. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the water vapor imagery or not, but there's this tremendous advection of dry air that is coming down through the middle of the state. And so, all that convection is well out to the north and well out to the east, but not at all on the west side of the circulation.
So you think that may, even as that band of heavy rain now is kind of wrapped to the north, kind of choke it off a little bit as it tries to wrap around on the west side? So it'll be, you may get it westward, but it won't have any luck because of the dry air.
Yeah, it certainly looks like that. I mean, when you look at it on the water vapor imagery, you see that banding kind of coming around, and then, those showers collapse a little bit. They keep trying to surge forward, but they keep collapsing as they start to encounter that drier air. And when you look at the advection of this, you can see the leading edge of that dry air coming down in the northern part of the state 12 hours ago. I mean, it's just been tremendous. And so, I do think that is going to limit some of the weather that we see along the coast. So I think we're probably going to be looking at tropical storm force winds, but certainly a tremendous battering in terms of wave action and, also some significant surge in some areas. Jim?
Carl, isn't it amazing when you look back 5 days ago and especially now that we've seen what's happened in Grand Bahama Island and the Abacos, and realize that really the earlier forecasts with this had the scenario for Central and South Florida.
Yeah.
Where the storm would come in as a monster, stall, and then move north. And really, there is no way that we have the infrastructure to handle anything like that.
Yeah.
Nor does anybody, for that matter.
No, this is something that I, had actually said on Twitter at one point that we have never, ever seen a situation like that where you've got an extremely high-end hurricane that has slowed to a crawl over a major metro in the U.S. We've seen it in more rural areas, but not over a major metro. And, the center of the storm, that eye wall, that most dangerous part of the storm, came within 70 miles of South Florida. So if you just move that over, I mean, it's incredible when you think about the level of precision that we expect from weather forecasting these days. I mean, if you'd have gone back 20, 30 years certainly, but even maybe 20 years, and you'd have watched a 185 mile per hour hurricane moving west towards Florida and, trying to count on a turn, we rely so much more on the modeling now. It's so much better than it used to be. But if that had happened, if it had gotten just 70 miles farther to the west, you'd be talking about an unmitigated disaster in Florida. Would have been one of the worst hurricanes we've ever seen in Florida.
Yeah, guys, that you just heard Carl's explanation. That's how close we came, really. That doesn't take anything away from what's happened, because that is very much reality for the Bahamas. Our hearts are in our stomachs, certainly, from what we've seen out of these pictures, and we'll continue to see pictures and hear stories of just how horrible the situation is. It's going to be a long, long, long recovery for an island chain that will be forever changed. All right, Carl, let's throw it back to you in the studio with more nuts and bolts on Dorian.
Jim, absolutely right. Just an absolutely heartbreaking scene there in the Bahamas. And again, our hearts do go out to all the people of the Bahamas. It's been an awful time. And finally now the storm is beginning to move. We have a new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. The storm is now moving northwest at 5 miles per hour. And in the last advisory was moving at 3 miles per hour. And so we had just a stall for a solid day there in the western end of Grand Bahama Island. And now not only has the turn occurred, but it's actually starting to accelerate. It's starting to pick up speed. So everything that we've been talking about all along is finally now coming to pass. And in terms of the broad strokes of the forecast, it is pretty much the same as it's been. If anything, maybe a little bit more offshore relative to Florida. So at this point, we're really not looking for a whole lot of hurricane force wind, maybe winds gusting to hurricane force, especially in some of the banding, some of the showers that sort of pivot off the central part of the circulation. And then it's going to begin to turn out to the northeast, and the core of the storm could very well come right across North Carolina, and that's going to be going into Thursday. The storm is probably still going to be a formidable storm at that time, could be a Category 2 hurricane, so we certainly could be talking about major impacts coming into the Carolinas. But one good thing, one positive thing that we're seeing is that there is a lot of dry air both in Florida and the Carolinas. That may help to limit some of the effects here. In fact, as you look at the radar picture, you can see that there's a lot of weather out from the center and out to the north side. And as that is trying to come in, it's encountering this dry air. And so, I think it's going to have a harder time making its way in. Right now, we are seeing some gusty wind gusting to tropical storm force in Vero Beach. It's been higher than that in spots. But you look at this deepest convection, this banding right in there. I mean, that's the area where you'd really start to get into some potentially hurricane force winds. That's still about 45 miles offshore. And, as this continues to pivot in, it's going to be having this dry air to contend with. But we are certainly getting some very gusty winds, gusting well over 50 miles per hour at a number of locations so far today. But here you see, this is a look at the water vapor imagery. We talked about this earlier. You can see where this deep dry air started to come down there, continues to be drawn down into Florida. So that's what these showers and storms are going to be up against as they try to pivot into Florida. And without there being some weather there, a lot of that strongest wind remains aloft. It doesn't make its way all the way down to the ground. We are seeing some modest water level rises right now along the East Coast, Lake Worth Pier and up into Trident Pier as well. This is the current storm surge forecast, 3 to 5 feet from Jupiter up to Daytona, and then 4 to 7 feet into Jacksonville, across the Georgia coast, and then right up into North and South Carolina. The storm is not going to be as strong as Matthew in 2016 as it moves up to the north, and it's also going to track a little to the east of Matthew. So Matthew's not a really great analog. It's going to be similar in some respects, but it's probably not going to be as bad as Matthew for a lot of the coast. Now, here we're looking at the wind and also the tide cycles. We're going into low tide later this afternoon. We'll go forward into late tonight, midnight tonight, and that's when we're going to see a high tide or somewhere around there. And at that time, the strongest of wind driving into the Space Coast. So that's when we could expect to see a maximum water level rise in that area. Then we go into Wednesday morning and we see a low tide at that time. So that's going to help out a little bit. And then into the middle of the day on Wednesday, we're seeing that very strong onshore flow around Daytona and Jacksonville. And that is going to be another high tide. All right, we want to get back out to, I'm sorry, where are we going now? Let's go to Tevin Wooten, and Tevin is in Vero Beach. Yeah. And, Tevin, even though the storm is largely offshore, it certainly gives you a sense of just how much power is out there, because you're really getting wild up there.
I heard some people swimming there surfing. Right, Carl, and we hate to use the term or the phrase downgraded in terms of intensity and winds. This is still very much a strong storm here. It's 100 miles east-southeast, but we're starting to see some of the winds right now. Just last hour, a gust close to 45 miles per hour. That wind energy still here in the atmosphere, and it's quite the juxtaposition right now. We have the strong waves out there, and not too far away, another outer rain band on the way within the next 30 minutes to 45 minutes. But I'm looking up. I'm able to see blue sky. I'm able to see sunshine, and I hope people are not getting that false sense of security like we are out of this 100%. No, we are not. On the whole, we should be okay faring into Wednesday and eventually Thursday too, and the forecast should improve. But the winds here are the strongest they've been since Dorian has started. In fact, the waves are also just as strong and stronger than they've been. I want to show you this right here. This is the sand wall about 8 to maybe 9 feet down. But look at how, or the seawall rather, look at how as the water comes in, you can sort of see some of the debris it left behind, but it's eroding slowly at this seawall here, taking the sand away, taking also some of the sea turtle nest away as well. So that's an unfortunate situation when it comes to wildlife. Another thing here, police officers and law enforcement and the county warning people they should not come out to the boardwalk, though it is a sight that a lot of people don't see with this water all the time. This high up, the beaches are closed and still will remain closed into tonight and into Wednesday as well. Liana, that's the latest here in Vero Beach. Let's get back inside to you.
All right, thanks so much, Tevin, and we'll get back in the field in just a moment, but we want to get you caught up on what we know about Hurricane Dorian right now. The death toll now stands at 7, including 5 on the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas. The Bahamas Prime Minister says relief and rapid assessment teams are standing by and will be deployed to Abaco and Grand Bahama as soon as possible. Nearly 3 million Americans are under evacuation orders in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, and almost 12 million people are under tropical alerts in the U.S. And if you have to evacuate or if you lose power as the storm progresses, you can still listen to the Weather Channel on Sirius XM Channel 105. Sirius XM will be live streaming our air throughout the duration of the storm, and the service is free. You do not need a subscription to hear the live broadcast. We have a team of meteorologists covering every angle of the storm Hurricane Dorian as it moves slowly closer and closer to the East Coast. Stay with the Weather Channel for live team coverage of tracking Dorian all day and night.
Tell us about, first of all, what we can expect in Florida. And I know that early on the storm was inviting some comparisons to Hurricane Michael, but it is going to be different both in terms of intensity and track. And so for people that went through that, how do you think the impacts will differ in this case?
Well, in this case, I mean, you can already see, you know, we got that eye of the hurricane that's been stationary for so long over the Bahamas, finally moving north at 5 miles an hour. But I think we're going to see these rain bands. But with time, as we get close to the coastline, I think what you're going to see is some of these could stretch inland. So you're going right along the coast where we have these hurricane warnings, where you get the closest approach of those hurricane force winds now stretching out 60 miles from the center. But even as you move northward, you see getting pretty close to the Carolinas as well. But we can't let our guard down, because even though this track is offshore, you can still see that water coming up. We're looking at the latest information. Stewart, Florida, and Martin County, a satellite beach, already seeing those water levels rise. So storm surge and the wind still going to have impacts, even though the center is offshore.
And Ken, there's an awful lot of dry air that is now beginning to come down across the state of Florida and also lingering across the Carolinas. Do you think that is going to serve to actually degrade some of the weather on the west and northwest side of the cyclone as it moves north?
Yeah, you might see some of that associated with this moving northward. You can see some of it. But I think what we're going to see is continue to expand some of these winds. So even right along the coast, I think we're really concerned, you know, how close it's going to be to the coast. That's why we have, you know, the hurricane warning and it watches up to the Carolinas, because you're going to be so close to the coastline. You're going to see some of those hurricane force winds. I mean, this is 8 a.m. on Thursday. The center being off of Cape Hatteras there, 8 a.m. on Friday. So being so close, you're going to see some of these hurricane force winds. I was trying to plot some of the arrival times, and it looks like the Carolinas, you know, by tomorrow evening into Thursday spreading across. So those are the tropical storm force winds here and hurricane force winds right on the coastline.
All right, Ken, thank you so much. Certainly a long way to go with the storm. We certainly appreciate everything you do there. And let's go now to Felicia Combs, and she's been reporting on the storm for us, I believe, in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia. And Felicia, it looks like it's going to be certainly not right over them, but it's going to be awfully close, and it's going to be a tough go of it for a while there.
Yeah, that's right, Carl. Awfully close enough that we are in that wind field. As mentioned with some of the updates, the hurricane is hurricane wind field growing, so something that they're certainly concerned with. Now, I will tell you, we've been here at the Civic Center, the evacuation assembly area where they're helping people evacuate from, and it has moved so efficiently that most people are already on their way to Augusta. I'm actually here with the mayor of Savannah, Mayor Eddie Deloach, and just want to talk to you a little bit. You've been out, you've been visiting with the people who are evacuating. Tell me what you're seeing amongst people.
Well, we got people that appreciate things, and they really appreciate it, what we're doing here. They take time out and tell you thank you, and they tell the folks that work here thank you. And we got a good group that assembled here to do the work. We got a lot of training. Unfortunately, over the last 4 years, we've had 3 hurricanes, and we've learned to be more efficient and take care of people, make them realize that we do care about who they are and what it's about, and that we're trying to do what's good for them. And they in turn appreciate that, and they tell us thank you and give us some great comments and things that we can do better. But it's all about the staff. We've got great people from different organizations. We got the Salvation Army, we got our staff, we got CETA, and we got the state, federal, all of them are all combined in here to make this thing happen. And it's been well for us over the years. And this is probably the best it's ever been.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Mayor Deloach. Thank you so much for speaking with us. This has just really cleared out quickly. It's been such a very smooth process for everyone to where the evacuation assembly area is basically empty now behind me, and that is great news. People are taking this seriously. They're getting out, and we've got you covered for the duration of Dorian.
Coastal there, and Jim, that's in Stewart. Wow, just an amazing scene out there, Jim.
This is pretty unbelievable. I don't know what's happened in the last 10-15 minutes here, but the winds have picked up, Carl, and obviously the intercoastals responded to that. The spray up has been absolutely incredible. Normally you could walk out here where the wave and the water just passes underneath, but obviously that's not going to be the case today. Just incredible wave action, and I can't believe there was actually a boat out here on the other side, of the calmer side of the intercoastal waterway earlier. I couldn't believe if that was out there now, this could have been an absolute disaster for that watercraft. So here's the deal, guys. We continue to get winds that are probably the strongest that we've seen. I'm thinking, Carl, maybe the sun, which has been out now for about a half hour, has allowed to mix up to some of those stronger winds off the deck, which happen. The stronger as we go up, that's for sure. And that has really, really kicked up the wind in through here. So the sun, in this case, is not our friend. It is certainly causing some issues in through here. But in terms of undermining the parking lot, in terms of undermining the concrete, we don't see any of that. But I can tell you, when I was on the other side, or if I stand over here a little bit, and literally you've got a 20-inch thick seawall of concrete. When the waves hit that, I can feel the whole ground shake. So the power of the water, just absolutely incredible. Just absolutely incredible here. Wow. I mean, look at that. Going over the bridge. This is the causeway right here. This just opened up, by the way, within the last hour and a half. The good news is it's not down here because it would be impassable at the present time. Again, guys, we still got issues in Florida with situations like this. I'm wondering if this sun is going to unleash even stronger winds in other areas. That's certainly a possibility. And really, if you think about even the circulation center, and Carl, you know this as well as anybody, they don't just come straight up. Even as a Cat 2, they have these circoidal or circular movements. So any little jog, even an eighth or a quarter of a degree off to the west, means you've kind of brought some of the worst winds a little bit farther to the west as well. So this dry air, or whatever it is that's getting into this, that's maybe giving us some sunshine here, is not going to be good here for the intercoastal.
To look at me now, you don't see.
That's coming from the waves is reducing the visibility. believe it or not, we were actually walking out there about an hour ago. So the waves have picked up. The water's high now because we're at high tide. So the wind is what's really been the biggest change. And we've had wind between rain, and then of course the rain clears out and we get into the clearing. So I'm wondering if the sun has actually kind of mixed up the air to a level where it's brought some of those stronger winds down, because typically that's the case. You're either going to get the rain bands to do it or mixing with the sun to bring that big energy down. But this is just an incredible sight out here to see this intercoastal. Wow! That just touched the bottom of the bridge. Holy smoke! You know, obviously having wave action that's perpendicular to the seawall, which is about 20 inches wide, okay? It's about that wide. I mean, you can literally feel the ground move when the waves pound against that seawall. So an incredible sight. This little thing right here is usually used when people are out here fishing to clean their fish. To give you an idea how powerful the wind is, it ripped the stand part off of the bottom of it. Okay, so just to give you an idea what kind of wave action is kicking up the onshore here. Just unbelievable. Man, I've been standing out this stuff for a couple hours now. What's really amazing, you know, you look at what's behind me here on this side. I do want to come over and let you know how this walkway and this concrete is kind of dampening out the waves a little bit. You come over to this side of the intercoastal and look out in here. Notice there's no big waves. There's no wash tub action going on out here at all at this point. But guys, there's so much energy with this hurricane that, you know, you just don't go down a category. You start to see all this wind energy unravel and continue to pound. And remember, we're only moving at 5 miles an hour, which is a far cry from the 1 we were at, but that's still a very slow movement. So this is going to continue to beat up these waterways and certainly bays and even the rivers. We've got the St. Lucie River, we've got the Indian River. All those areas are actually going to see the water rise with the actual high tide itself, and we've got the king tide going on too. All in all, in terms of the worst of this, yes, we dodged it. But boy, I'll tell you, this is just a little fraction, a little sliver of what this thing can do, Carl Parker, when you put wind over water. Just incredible, buddy.
Jim, it is amazing to see that level of power when you're talking about the storm, the eye wall still being 70, 80 miles offshore. Yes. Just an unbelievable sight there. Really is. Jim, thank you so much. And let's take a look at the radar picture here. And, you know, as you look at this, as you look at that inner eye wall, this is where the hurricane is. It is offshore, not by a whole lot. And this is why all along we've been concerned about the possibility of little wobbles. And we are seeing one of those little wobbles right now. So right in there, this ring that is around the center, that's the eye wall. That's where the hurricane force winds are. And then certainly in all of this deeper convection off to the north, very strong winds there. Some of that is now edging a little bit closer to the coast. And in fact, if you follow the track, we've got the track of the storm right there, was moving north, and then more recently, a little bit of a jog more to the northwest. And so with that jog to the northwest, that moves all of this weather also a little farther to the west. So, you know, when you look at this, it's not very far offshore. This is where Jim is, right there in Stewart, and you've got this banding that is really not far at all, maybe about 30 to 35 miles offshore. And so certainly eventually some of that could get a little bit closer, and when more of that banding, more of that heavy rain gets into the coast, that certainly increases the wind speeds. It is such a powerful storm, and it's going to have a huge impact here, even with the worst of the weather being offshore. And this is the latest National Hurricane Center track showing those hurricane force winds, that core of strongest winds remaining offshore. But remember, we don't just jump from low-grade tropical storm force to hurricane. This is a gradient through here. So, you know, about midway through here, we're talking about very strong tropical storm force winds, and those are going to be tangling with the coast, especially where some of that banding can make its way onshore, and it certainly will be doing that over the next couple of days. We're going to have much more on this dangerous storm coming right up.
Island chain forever changed. You know, the days before Dorian and now the days after, and here we are, you know, 100 miles away in Martin County, you know, near West Palm Beach is, of course, the biggest city. And we're dealing with just wind over water, creating just an incredible wash tub out here in the Intercoastal Waterway. The beach is that way, and so is Dorian. The mainland, of course, behind me here, where winds are offshore at the present time. But we're also at the time of high tide. So the water is the highest in the St. Lucie River, the Indian River, in the bays, on the ocean as well. It's just the wind direction has changed here as slowly but surely the storm will get to pull away. What's really been interesting today is the fact that we've gotten into some rain bands. Those have produced over 50-mile-per-hour gusts. All right, but we've also had periods of sun. And over the last 45 minutes or so, we've gotten quite a bit of sun here after one rain band that moved through. And I really think that with the high tide allowed stronger winds aloft to come down. And so we were literally standing here with sustained winds of about 50 miles per hour. Those have calmed down a little bit, but the Intercoastal has not. And you can see what's going on with that. All the wave action banging up against this 20-inch thick seawall here and literally having the water spray straight up. So it obviously looks very, very dramatic. But you know what, guys? I'm going to tell you, just standing here, where that bangs against the wall, I can feel it in the ground. I mean, it literally shakes the ground because it's banging into it so hard. Absolutely incredible in through here. So, Carl, let's talk about where we go from here with this. Again, Cat 2 110, but as it moves to the north, it will still do these kind of circoidal movements, and it seems like maybe even an eighth or a quarter of a degree off to the west a little bit will get us closer to some of these stronger winds, especially if we get in the bands or you know, some of the gradients that exist within the core itself. So either way, the beaches, some of these open waterways certainly are in for a beating.
All right, Jim, you know, and as we're looking at the radar picture here, we've actually got the radar superimposed with the track of the storm. And, you know, you were talking about those trochoidal movements, and there is definitely a northwestward shift. And I think what's happened in your case is that you've just gotten that much closer to some of that banding, and I think that's probably a big part of why you're seeing more wind there. You know, I think this is the kind of thing that we've been discussing all along, that just a little bit of a shift in the track in the storm. Right. And it's not at all uncommon for hurricanes to sort of wiggle to the west and to the east, you know, relative to a northward track. Not at all uncommon to see that, and that's what has us concerned going through the night tonight and tomorrow.
And I got to be honest with you, Carl, they just opened this causeway, and you know, I'm not going to question anybody's moves here, but I don't know if that was a good idea yet, because the winds are the strongest they've been. They're the strongest they've been right now, and of course you go up, let's say 10, 20, 30 feet, which is where this causeway is, and they're going to be stronger as we go up 30 feet. So if you got a high-profile vehicle, I would still avoid some of these causeway bridges that were open here, getting across the Intercoastal toward the beaches, guys. Seriously, because the winds have just been too strong. Hopefully they'll calm down. They'll continue to do so. Even though they're offshore, they're still pretty strong. The rain bands and then the sunshine is going to help mix down some of the power from this just incredible hurricane that continues to move gradually away from us. It's now just east-northeast of us, Carl, the center anyway, by about 95 miles.
You know, and Jim, I think a lot of people focus on that point with the idea of the core of the storm being offshore, but, you know, it's really important to remember what this thing was not that long ago. Right. We are talking about a storm that was the second most intense by wind speed in Atlantic Basin history, tied with a few others. And so there is an enormous amount of power that is still in this storm, even as it is coming down in intensity.
Yeah, and I mean, Carl, you see right now, I mean, I've got sun out in here. And you know, I mean, we're still got a strong sun. So you're going to mix up. I got blue sky. Up there, and you know that's not helping us right now. That's not helping us. So guys, just kind of avoid the causeways if you would, and especially if you get into some of these heavy rain bands, definitely slow it down. Those are going to be your big issues, and certainly stay out of the water too. The beaches are going to be horrible, probably for the next couple of days before this thing begins to wind down. But Carl, why don't you give us a timeline, maybe state by state, of when some of the worst conditions are going to be? Obviously tonight, Space Coast, first coast of Florida, a little bit of that certainly tomorrow morning, but take us on from there for Georgia, for South Carolina, and certainly North Carolina. And maybe your opinion too, I'd like to hear about, could this thing come inland, let's say, in parts of North Carolina?
Yeah.
Or do you still think we're staying offshore?
I think it's entirely possible. Certainly a lot of the ensemble guidance, the GFS model guidance has been a little farther onshore into South Carolina and North Carolina. We just got a new run of the European model. I can show you that. And so what this European model is showing is something that is very similar. It's doing a pretty good job of what we call initializing, painting a picture of what's going on right now, showing that a lot of the worst weather is on the north and east side of the storm, but that some of this banding is starting to tangle with the coast there in Florida. So that's now. Let's take it forward in time. We'll go into 1 o'clock tonight. And then we see a little more vigor on the west side of the circulation and very much getting involved with the coast there, say from right around St. Lucie County on northward into Melbourne and towards the Space Coast as well. So that's when you can expect to see some of the strongest winds along the coast there, probably tropical storm force, but certainly capable of gusting to hurricane force. Also, we're going to be looking at some surge coming in as well, and then continuing up the coast there and on towards Jacksonville as well. Well, joining us now on the phone is Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator. What is your biggest concern at this hour?
You were just talking about it, and that's the storm surge and the fact that a lot of people are watching the forecast and they're saying, oh, okay, the center of the storm is going to be off the coast. Yeah, we're not getting landfall, but we're getting a lot of ugly stuff. First, just those bands that come whipping through alone are going to catch some people by surprise, heavy rains, wind, and then the storm surge. I got to tell you, I give tremendous credit to the National Hurricane Center. These projections they've been doing, they're getting better at it every year in terms of identifying storm surge, and the cones, if you compare them to the cone of uncertainty from 10 years ago, much narrower, really helped emergency officials sort of evacuate surgically the right places. So if you've been told to evacuate, it is with high certainty that you are in a place that's in danger given the nature of the storm. And I hope people stick with that here, because that's where you can see some real damage and loss of life, unfortunately.
You know, there's a constant fight with the beaches there, of beach replenishment projects ongoing over many years. Are you concerned about the level of erosion that's going to occur in this case?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some that are actually on slate to begin erosion programs, and so that's good news in the sense that we hadn't started some of them, and so we're going to get to it anyway. There are others that have been renewed just in the last couple of years that we may have to go to. We won't know till it's passed, but it really is not aesthetics. It's economic. I mean, the beaches and the access to the water are the economic lifeblood of a lot of these coastal communities. So it is something we're concerned about, because we'll have to go to D.C. and get money for that above and beyond whatever might kick in with FEMA and the other disaster relief.
And how are the evacuations going there across the state right now?
You know, I think Governor DeSantis did a very wise thing. He sort of left it to the local authorities to make that decision as opposed to ordering massive evacuations. And again, I go back to give credit to the National Hurricane Center. They have continued to develop not just the cone of uncertainty, but the modeling that they've been doing on storm surge has been very useful for county-level emergency operation officials to learn where are the areas that need to be evacuated and which are the areas that don't be. Because when you're evacuating places that don't need to be evacuated, you're clogging up roads and creating problems. And I think it's a great credit to them that they've been able to give us that information, and then the local and state authorities for picking the right places and moving on it. So we feel good, like always. There's some people out there that don't want to move, and because it didn't flood in the past. Every storm is different, and I wouldn't, if you're in an evacuation zone, there's a reason why, today more than ever, by the way.
And what would you like to say to those people that prepared for a storm that could have potentially been much worse, but now we're watching the worst of it remaining offshore?
I would say to you that, I mean, this is what we have to do. And I would tell you that a lot less people were displaced than ever before in a storm of this magnitude. I mean, you think about it, we had the storm kind of headed right at us, sitting out there just a few miles off the coast, everybody waiting for that turn, and local and state officials trusted the forecast and did not order mass evacuations from multiple counties. If this had been 10 years ago, if we had seen this storm 10 years ago, we would have had massive evacuations in many of Florida's, if not most of Florida's counties. It would have been a lot more disruptive. So the meteorology is getting better at this, and the projection on storm surge and things of this nature is getting better to the point where we are able to avoid now having to evacuate places that do not have to be evacuated. So I would just say that I think this has been, from a pre-storm perspective, the best response I've seen in the last 20 years.
A very important point there, Senator. Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so let's take a look at the latest on the storm right now. It is a Category 2 storm and moving to the north at moving to the northwest at 5 miles per hour. It's a 110 mile per hour storm and now picking up forward speed. So the last advisory had it moving at 3 miles per hour, now moving at 5 miles per hour. So not only has the turn occurred at this point, but it's also moving to the north. But what we are seeing is a little bit of wobbling going on, and there was a little bit of a wobble to the west, and that's bringing slightly more weather to the coast, which is what we've been concerned about all along. That type of wobbling is likely to continue. It's entirely possible that it gets a little farther west. It looks like the most dangerous core is going to be offshore, but remember, this was the second most intense storm by wind speed in Atlantic Basin history. There is a huge amount of power in this storm that is not going to go away quickly, and we could be looking at a landfall in North Carolina, and it's going to come very close to that potentially in South Carolina. We'll talk more about that forecast coming up, but we want to get out now to Tevin Wooten. He is in Vero Beach, and Tevin, I know you can attest to everything that we've been talking about here. You know, the storm, the core of the storm is offshore. That's certainly better than what it could have been. But when you're talking about such an incredibly powerful storm, it still is going to have an enormous impact there in Florida and down the stream a little bit into North and South Carolina.
Yeah, Carl, and Vero Beach, this is very much still a city, still on standby here, as Dorian is only about 90 to 100 miles away. That being the center, the outer rain bands, they have been here this morning and last night, and the winds, they are also strong too. Hurricane warnings remain in effect right now. We've seen wind gusts close to 25, winds sustained close to 25 miles per hour. The gusts, get this, the top gust so far today, close to 45 miles an hour. Here comes another gust through here. I'm looking off into the distance, and I'm looking at radar as well. Those outer rain bands are not far away, but because the winds are so strong, take a look at what it's doing to the Atlantic Ocean right now. This would typically be all beach here, but of course the waves are so strong, the water is so high, it's so powerful, it's so mighty, it is pushing all the way close up to this boardwalk here. A lot of this boardwalk has actually started to see a lot of sand erosion here on the dunes and beyond. We've seen some driftwood also carried back out. Austin, if you can zoom into that pipe right there, that actually should carry water back into the ocean, but because that pipe is actually covered in water, it's obviously not carrying any water out, and in fact water is being pushed in. It once was covered in sand this about 2 days ago, and now today completely exposed because all of the water has come up, eroded that sand on top of that pipe away, and that's the scene not just here but up and down this beach. I know a lot of people here in Vero Beach know about the ships that are sunk down here just off the shore. There's a United States flag that typically sticks out. Jim, that flag sticks out about 4 to 6 feet above the water's level, but because the waves have been so high and so strong today, that USA flag is not standing anywhere near this beach right now. But Jim, I hear you are getting pummeled with not just the rain, but also wind and waves as well.
Yeah, you know, Tevin, this is unbelievable here. Look at this. I mean, I don't know if you've got the sun out up where you were. I couldn't hear everything you were saying. You could have said that, so I apologize. But you can certainly see how the sun is out here in between rain bands. And that's the problem. You mix, it's still a hot, I can feel it. It's still mixing down some of the stronger winds aloft in this system, even though we've got a storm that's now moving to our north and east, okay, away from us, slowly but surely, and winds are out of the northwest. But that sun is not helping us out at all. That sun is not helping us out at all. It's still very, very windy here. We've seen to have calmed down a little bit here from just about a half hour ago, where we were easily at 50 miles an hour here with this. So hopefully the intercoastal will respond as a result of that. But right now, again, we're just past high tide here. And all these waterways are up. They're up because of the king tide. They're up because of the storm. And of course, they're up because of the regular tide cycle that happens every day with or without the storms. Amazing, amazing, guys, when you're standing here on this seawall and you feel that water pounding on what is a 20-inch wide concrete block. All right? You can literally feel the earth move under your feet. Incredible power of water, but certainly nothing like what they got in the Bahamas. At me, he's like, where did all this come from? And I'm like, dude, I'm going to be honest with you. I would have held off on the bridges a little bit. And I mean, they shut it down again. At least from what I understand, they shut the causeway down again. So, you know, we'll see. Not my call, and I'm not trying to upend anybody's call, but I just want everybody to be safe, even with these impacts here.
Right.
Sun's coming back out. We're going to see things, you know, lessen. Tevin, you know that. You're going to see the same thing eventually, too. Things will start to wind down a little bit. But I just want everybody to be safe. I don't want people to be harmed where they really shouldn't have been with something so simple as to just wait another hour or two before conditions improve.
And
wow,
Jim, let me speak on that as well. We've got some crazy waves out here. We've got crazy winds as well. I saw a parent let their kid by himself go down there unattended as the water and as the waves are coming in. That is an extremely dangerous situation, folks. Dorian is not done yet. Do not discount this threat coming in the next 12 to 15 hours. We'll be right back.
One of the winds, when you think about, we're at 50, they were 185 in the Bahamas. That's not just a 135-mile-an-hour difference, okay? It is an exponential relationship to the power of that wind. So the answer was, and thank you, James Cinco, for looking this up, 1,400 times stronger than what we're dealing with now. 1,400 times stronger, Carl. So that's amazing. You factor that into you know, buildings, the types of buildings that take that kind of wind load, trees. You see trees stripped from their leaves, their bark. You know, at 185 miles an hour, what are we looking at hurricane category or tornado category wise? I mean, we're up there on the upper end of the tornado category. So similar type situations there with EF4, EF5 tornado.
Yeah, exactly. An EF4 tornado that is 20 miles wide and that didn't move for, 12 to 18 hours.
Wow.
Just unbelievable. And, we can show you, Jim, the satellite and radar picture combined here to show you what you were asking about. So, yeah, there are breaks, certainly, in the cloud cover. There's drier air right now in the mid and upper levels in Florida, and these banding features are now just offshore. Now, I think a part of why the winds really stepped up there is because there's been this little bit of a wobble. If you follow the track, and we'll take a look at that, notice winds gusting to 41 in Melbourne, gusting to 36 in Vero. But if you look at, this is the fix here from the National Hurricane Center. So there's this northwestward wobble, and now it's more north. So the mean of that motion is northwest, but as we often see, it's a wobble, and with that wobble, I think that is helping to get some of that banding just a little bit closer to the coast, and some of those stronger winds a little bit closer to the coast. So, as you mentioned, whatever the mechanism is, whether it's heavy rain or perhaps some mixing in the clearing, you're getting more of that strong wind field closer to the coast now, and so this is basically what we're going to be facing from here on out through the rest of the night and into early tomorrow, Jim.
And that's what we expected, Carl. We expected gusts to tropical storm force. We expected winds to be sustained at tropical storm force with this. We thought, certainly given the new information this morning, that we probably wouldn't get a hurricane force gust on the coast, and that's obviously a good thing. But still, this is still nasty weather to drive in, especially if you're 30 feet up on a causeway, or certainly trying to land a plane into Daytona or Orlando and West Palm, which is why those airports are closed, frankly, because of the wind and the configuration of the airports. Those all go factoring into that equation. But again, Carl, let's talk about this, because when let's look at this and use a football game. If today was really the first quarter with this thing for Florida, we've still got the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter to go, albeit those seem to be coming a little bit faster given the speed of this.
Yeah, we do, and we can show you the latest run of the European model, which is actually just a little west relative to previous runs, and so it's showing more of that western edge really tangling with the coast there from Fort Pierce and Stewart on north into Melbourne, into the Space Coast. That is going through late tonight. That, by the way, coinciding with high tide, so that's when we'll be looking at some maximum water level rises on the Space Coast. Then tomorrow morning, coming up farther north, more towards Flagler Beach and St. Augustine, and then towards Jacksonville into tomorrow evening. Long way to go with this very dangerous storm. Much more coming up. First of all, how are you and your family doing? All right, I'm not sure that we have Chris on the phone at this time. We'll try to continue to talk to him. Just a devastating, devastating storm in the Bahamas, probably one of the worst we have ever seen there. In fact, certainly so for the northern part of the Bahamas. So let's talk a little bit more about this forecast and where we go from here. And we expect that the center of the storm is going to be offshore relative to Florida. However, tropical storm force winds, hurricane force gusts will continue through tonight. We're going to be looking at storm surge of 4 to 7 feet. And then the storm is going to come very close to or perhaps over North and South Carolina. And so we're looking at the possibility of more direct impacts from the storm, particularly in North Carolina. And it could be a Category 2 storm at that time. So we've got a long way to go yet. That's going to be towards Thursday, and the storm moving out on Friday. Here is the current radar, and you can see how we've got this banding that is offshore. So the worst weather continues to be offshore, but some of that banding now beginning to edge onshore, and it has been rough on the coast there. Our own Jim Cantori has been in Stuart, Florida, right on the Intracoastal. A remarkable amount of wave action there on the Intercoastal, and the winds have been tremendous. And, you know, Jim, even being, well away from the storm, you're talking about one of the strongest storms that we have ever seen in the Atlantic Basin. There's a huge amount of power there and inertia, and it's just not going to be coming down quickly,
Yes.
not by any means.
No, it's not. And I mean, here I am, probably 4 miles from the water, 3 miles from the water, the ocean, I mean, on the Intercoastal. And you can see what's happening here with the wind coming right down the Intercoastal. Now, Carl, the last 15 minutes or so, we've been overcast again, and occasionally we get some showers. But the one thing I wanted to share with you, because I know you've been out in the field during tropical systems, and sometimes when the air tries to entrain in the storm a little bit, you can almost feel it with the rain. So I hear the waves from the Intercoastal are hitting me, and it's a warm water. But when it's raining out and the wind is kind of blowing up under my jacket a little bit from the rain cool there, it kind of has a dryness to it, like an evaporational coolingness to it. Now it's still moist. I mean, we're still in a tropical environment, but that's something I think is kind of interesting. With the rain, maybe is that some of the dry air that's getting into this western side of the system, which we've certainly seen on satellite. We've certainly seen it on radar presentation as well. But at the moment, Carl, like you said, these little circoidal wobbles, sometimes east, sometimes back to the west, mean track to the northwest, bring this energy with this incredible hurricane back toward the west, even as in a weakened Category 2 state. And that's what I think we're seeing at this point. So we're not out of the woods. It's still horrible to be out here. A lot of people, when the sun comes out, just want to go outside and just kind of explore and see what's changed. What has Hurricane Dorian done to their neck of the woods? Thank goodness nothing like what it did to the Bahamas, not even remotely close. But certainly still, it's a day where nobody should be on the water. Earlier on, we actually had someone out in a boat, not on this side, where it's agitated like this, but on the other side where it's a lot calmer. And they were coming up. They were planning on crossing under the bridge. And then they made a smart decision to turn around and go back the other way. Thank goodness, because that would have not ended well. That would have not ended well. I promise you there. All right, Carl, again, what do you think? I want to ask, what do you think we'll see at the 5 o'clock advisory? Any type of significant change, both track and intensity-wise, or are we pretty much on a steady decline here and maybe movement, at least temporarily, but eventually an increase in speed?
Yeah, I think the modeling is pretty locked in. It has been interesting to see there was just a very slight shift to the west in the latest European model, just a little bit closer to the coast, bringing more of this big shield of rain here into the coastline, and especially so into the Treasure Coast. I don't know that that's going to make an impact on the track. From the National Hurricane Center, who, by the way, they've done just an incredible job forecasting this storm. And here you see where all that weather is. So that is just starting to edge towards the coast, and that's why it's been really rough there from the Space Coast and on southward. And we're going to have much more on Dorian on the other side of the break.
A little bit, so our photographer doesn't get wobbled with the rainfall, and at least on the camera lens as well. Sorry, Jim, I'm going to divert from your question for just a second. We've got like near whiteout conditions not too far away from the shore here on the Atlantic Ocean. We are in Vero Beach right now on the barrier island. And let me tell you, we've been bracing for impact for days. People have been boarded up. They've been cooped up in their homes. Their businesses have been shut down. No one's been able to drive anywhere because of evacuations that were ongoing, because of law enforcement and first responders not advising commute and traffic. And now, just days after that warning went out, finally it's here. I know people are getting outside and they're like, where's the storm? What does my neighborhood look like? This is what it looks like. Yes, we do have wind gusts close to 45 miles per hour, surpassing tropical storm threshold. And guess what? I don't think this is the end of it in terms of the forecast. I think this is just the beginning with Dorian and its impacts on the east coast of Florida. Now, is it as bad as it could have been had we took a direct hit? Obviously not. We're not talking about a Category 5 like the northwestern Bahamas saw. Thank goodness we're not talking about that here. Of course, we're certainly thinking about those people in the Bahamas and on the island chain. But here on the East Coast, we cannot let our guard down. Granted, this storm is moving towards the northwest at 5 miles an hour, but still the impacts will be resolved here or figured out or realized, if you will. Excuse me for searching for words there. We've got wind gusts, again, close to 45 miles per hour. That reported at the Vero Beach Airport. I think a little bit closer to that, closer to 50, just about 10 or 15 minutes or so ago. I've got water and sand in my eye right now. Contacts aren't doing so well, but you do have to keep this in mind. If you're getting out, they opened those bridges here in Indian River County right around 11 o'clock this morning. If you come to the barrier island and you get stuck, that is something you will have to deal with. There is certainly a possibility that the barrier island could close down in terms of those bridges closing down, letting people off again. So keep that in mind. I know that they want to let as many people off should they need to, but if winds get beyond 39 miles per hour sustained, that's tropical storm force. They don't like to let people across because of the engineering that's been sort of recommended or not recommended in terms of travel from the engineers. Now, here's another thing that could occur. Think about this. If you're pushing a table, you don't necessarily push it parallel. You're not going to move that table anywhere. Pretend this is the table. You push it perpendicular. There's a 90-degree angle. So keep in mind, if you have a high-profile car, more surface area on top of that car, on the side of that car, and the winds are cutting across the bridge, guess what? Yes, the winds are stronger there, but there's also more surface area there too that might cause that car, that SUV, that diesel to start to wobble. That's certainly something that we are advising in terms of travel, just as people are traveling out on this Tuesday here in Vero Beach. Another thing though, 751 people, they were in shelters earlier this week. I'm not sure if that number has gone up or gone down here in Indian River County, but there were 6 shelters. They do plan on closing those tomorrow morning right around 8 a.m. So if you've got family or friends here, do give them a call, give them a check, and just like that, done are the outer rain bands, at least for now here in Vero Beach, but certainly more where that came from. I do think in the forecast later on tonight, Carl, and you can tell me more about this forecast if I'm right or wrong. We'll see that tomorrow. I think there's more still to go here with Dorian later on today.
Well, yeah, it's going to be a very tough night along the coast. There's no question about that. Tropical storm force winds sustained easily, but then probably getting up to hurricane force, and we can actually run through some of the maps here for you to show you what's going on. We did get the new advisory from the Hurricane Center. They're coming out at every hour. The full advisory, the new forecast package, as we call it, with the new track and intensities, that'll be out inside of the next hour. So a 110 mile per hour storm right now, Category 2, still moving northwest at 5 miles per hour. And so not a lot of change relative to the last hour's advisory. Now, here you see the radar and satellite picture combined. Jim's been talking about some of the drier air wrapping in there. You can see how there's a relative lack of cloud across a lot of Florida. So there is some drier, more continental air that's wrapping into the west side. And then out in here, this is the business end of the storm. That's the eye wall right there. That's where the hurricane force winds are, extending a good 60 miles from the center. And so, you know, the question is just how much of this banding, this is where the more substantial weather is going to tangle with the coast. Now, obviously, the Space Coast, which juts out there, has got a much better chance of seeing more of that weather going into tonight. Right now, we're getting winds gusting to 40 miles per hour in Vero Beach, gusting to 39 in Melbourne, but we've gotten a lot of reports of winds gusting over 50 miles per hour. There you see what is called the velocity data, and so that blue coloring indicating where we're seeing the hurricane force winds, and so that again extending out into this area of the storm. Now the hurricane force winds are likely for the most part going to stay offshore, but where this banding gets closer and closer to the coast, that's where we get into strong tropical storm force winds, which is precisely what Jim has been going through. And as we see little wobbles here, and that's really interesting, that latest fix actually wobbling a little more to the east. Jim, as we see these little wobbles back and forth, as the storm gets a little bit closer to the coast there, it brings a little more of that weather onshore, and it is such a powerful storm. We're going to be talking about a really long night along the coast there in Florida.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Carl, when I think about it for people are jumping for joy because this is moving at 5 miles an hour, which is relatively slow, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still incredibly slow, but it's certainly fast compared to what it was, so it seems like it's moving fast. And that slow movement and that unraveling and those western wobbles that we see bring this intense weather back here. So now we've got this combination of what has been really since I want to say for the last 15, 20 minutes, almost persistent rain. This has been our most persistent rain that we've seen. And it is with these rain, it is with these stronger bands, as you know, bring down some of those stronger winds. So like Tevin said, ahead of us on the Treasure Coast, on the Space Coast, on the First Coast. And we're not going to be finished up in Florida even when the sun comes up tomorrow morning. Carl, looking back at this in the preparations, I think one of the hardest things for us to make realize is what the emergency management, what the Hurricane Center goes through in terms of planning such mass population areas and getting them out of harm's way. Yeah. At the end of the day, some places may not get much, okay? But when you think about the prospects of what we could have had, you have to get that plan and you have to act upon it long before we know exactly where the storm is going to go. So if there's anything we can do as an enterprise, it's to help people realize the hard work that goes in from an emergency manager standpoint, from a National Weather Service standpoint, from a National Hurricane Center standpoint, from fire and rescue, local officials, all of that to try and get the least amount of harm to everyone in the path of these things. So if you're sitting there for a second and thinking, oh man, this thing was a bust, I gotta be honest with you, it was not a bust. It's not a bust, it's a success. And you saw that in multiple states enacting really very good, succinct plans, starting with Florida and moving right up through North Carolina.
And, you know, when you talk about a storm getting into an environment like that where you've got almost no wind driving the storm, that is going to be necessarily a difficult forecast when you've got such light steering currents. But, you know, we mentioned this before, it was actually a very good forecast when you consider that this turn is in fact occurring. You know, you don't have to go back that far. You might have to go back maybe just a couple of decades. No. And if you'd have had a storm like that with that intensity moving west towards the state of Florida, I think you would have had, you know, much more significant evacuation. Yes. You can think back to Floyd, for example. We thought that Floyd,
thank you.
Yes, was going to come up the coast.
That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point, Carl. Thank you. You just put several exclamation points on that. Where we've come in terms of emergency management and things like that, and evacuations, and certainly from a state and a local level, has been amazing. Has been amazing. All right, and I want you guys to thank your local emergency managers, your fire and rescue for that, because they've done a wonderful job out through here. We got a long night ahead of us. You can still see here in Martin County, we continue to get hammered by rain bands where it is hard to see, even as far out as 100 yards at this point in time. Tevin, you said you went through one of these heavy rain bands. I'm wondering if that's the same one that's rotated down this way. Just a little while ago.
Jim, I think so. I was actually looking at the radar about 20 minutes ago, and I was warning you that it was on your way. There it is for you right now. But let me tell you what it feels like for those at home that have never gone through. Say you're from Minnesota or North Dakota, you've never gone through a hurricane. It feels like acupuncture on your skin, on your face. Not only are there needles of rain poking you and prodding you every which way. If you're on the beach, there's also sand blasting you in the face at an unsurmountable, uncontrollable feel, almost going through a sensation, if you will, going through your mind. And then just as quickly as it starts, Jim, it stops.
Yeah, and maybe if you're lucky, the sun comes out for a little while. But for the last while, we have not seen the sun in quite some time. And I'll tell you, it's hard to drive in this stuff if you are going to be heading out. Certainly not much is open here. Not much is open here. So don't really plan on, oh, let's go out to dinner tonight. Let's go to the grocery store, because it's still very much a wait and see, especially at some of the major airports. Guys, our continuing coverage of Dorian and a new Hurricane Center forecast coming up in just a little bit.
Well, it finally happened, Zachary. Somebody burned down my she shed.
Here in the southeast as well. Sure, the Treasure Coast should still be on guard. All the way up into the first coast of Florida near Jacksonville and the coastal plains of Savannah, Georgia as well. First coast of Florida being in Jacksonville, Florida, and then Savannah, Georgia as well. Of course, they're on standby too, and I know the governor's there, the first responders there, and law enforcement officials have been warning people, heed the evacuation warnings if they're there. They're there for a reason. Carl.
All right, Tevin, thank you. And we've got a new advisory coming out from the National Hurricane Center here probably within the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, certainly so by the top of the hour. There you see the latest National Hurricane Center track of the storm and showing what's called the wind field. That area of yellow is the tropical storm force winds. The area of red is the hurricane force winds. And so we think that the hurricane force winds are, for the most part, the sustained hurricane force winds are going to stay offshore, but certainly we could be looking at winds gusting to hurricane force along the coast there. And then beyond that, you notice the track does get closer to the coast. So this is where we're going to be looking at the possibility of some hurricane force winds possibly coming onshore. There could actually be a landfall, particularly right around Cape Fear and into North Carolina. That's what we're going to be watching for Thursday and into Friday. Right now, looking at the character of the storm, there's the most dangerous part of the storm right there, the eye wall, and then all this banding that extends out a pretty good ways to the north and to some extent to the west. That's where the worst of the weather is, and it is now still just a little bit offshore. We're getting winds and now up to about tropical storm force or a little below, certainly gusting to tropical storm force along the coast there. We've gotten some reports of winds gusting to 50 miles per hour and greater, but you see that's only about 35 miles offshore. This deeper convection, this heavier rain, which is more likely to bring more of the wind that is aloft down to the ground. And so as that continues to edge towards the coast, there's a better chance that we're going to be looking at some hurricane force wind gusts. Hurricane warnings continue to be in effect from Martin County into St. Lucie County, into Indian River, Brevard, right up to Volusia, and into Duval as well. And then also there around Charleston, those are the areas where we are expecting to see at least some hurricane force wind gusts. And also water piling up along the coast. This is going to be a real problem through tonight and tomorrow. High tide is tonight at around midnight to 1 a.m. and then again in the middle of the day tomorrow. And by that time, the storm is going to be coming up in towards the northern part of Florida. We'll have much more on Dorian on the other side of the break.
The air, and it's just devastating just to see how many homes are embedded in there, and just seeing how far the water just went into the island. I mean, sadly, 5 people have been killed on Abaco Island, and it's just terrifying to see this kind of devastation and what to expect as we continue to see more images and video coming out of the Bahamas as well.
All right, so let's talk about what's going on in the tropics right now. We want to get to a couple of things that are also occurring outside of Dorian, and we'll talk about the new advisory from the Hurricane Center in a moment. Here's a brand new tropical storm. This is Fernand. This is going to be moving in pretty quickly into northeast Mexico, most likely to the south of the Rio Grande Valley, so probably not a lot of impact here in the U.S. Apart from some heavier rain. Certainly something we'll keep our eyes on, though. Tropics are very active right now. There's also new tropical depression in the eastern Atlantic that is expected to curve north into the North Atlantic. And here is the new advisory from the Hurricane Center on Dorian. Category 2 storm, 110 mile per hour wind. Little change right there. Now moving northwest at 6 miles per hour. So last couple of advisories, 5 miles per hour. The one before that, it was 3 miles per hour. So we are continuing to see an increase in forward speed. It is slowly but surely now making its way away from the Bahamas and on that northward track. That was one of the questions that a lot of people had over the last few days. Are we sure that it's going to take a northward turn? And the model guidance really settled in on that point. Now here's the new forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center. A little bit of a change here, and we still have an offshore track relative to Florida, but again, because you've got such a powerful storm, plenty of impacts on the coast, storm surge of 4 to 7 feet, and hurricane force wind gusts at least, we think, through tonight and early tomorrow. Then if you'll notice here, going farther in time as we get towards the Carolinas, this track is a little bit more to the west. The center line is a little bit more to the west. And so this implies that we could very much be looking at a landfall there, or maybe a couple of landfalls in North Carolina, perhaps around Cape Fear, and certainly so the Outer Banks and also into the Sounds. Also, they brought the intensity down just a little bit, and that might be implying that there's more interaction with land. If it's a little offshore, it's got more of a chance of staying stronger, whereas if it starts to get involved with land, it might weaken some, but we still could be looking at a Category 2, weakening perhaps to a Category 1 as it is coming up and across the North Carolina coast, and that is going to be late Thursday and going into Friday. So by no means do we want people to relax at this point. Even though the storm is offshore right now, it is going to get a lot closer to the coast. And in fact, it's going to begin to probably work onshore, at least partially onshore, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from Georgia, but especially so into South Carolina and certainly so into North Carolina. That's where the greatest chance of an actual landfall is going to be. So still a long way to go with this storm and very serious impacts yet farther down the road. Now, talking about what's happening right now, what we're seeing is this big shield of rain here that is starting to edge a little bit closer to the coast, and we've seen just tremendous wind and wave action and some water level rises as well, some flooding in Jensen Beach. And we want to get out to Tevin Wooten right now, has been reporting on Vero Beach for us. And, you know, Tevin, such a powerful storm, and even if you get some relative lulls, it's just going to be a long duration event there along the Florida East Coast.
Yeah, Carl, we are still not out of the woods just yet in terms of the impacts from Hurricane Dorian. A Category 2 storm, still powerful nonetheless. In fact, I was speaking with a resident here. They said they are certainly glad that they can sort of start to breathe a sigh of relief, but we're not done. Do not let your guard down. Do stay tuned to the Weather Channel as well. We've got continuing coverage of this storm. I mean, look, it's about 100 miles towards the east-southeast. You see the waves here. You see how hard they're crashing in. There is no beach right now because the waves are so strong, and it's not high tide yet. Give it till about midnight. You're going to see water start to surge here closer and closer towards the seawall. We have crews spread all across the southeast to cover this storm for you at home. Stay tuned to the Weather Channel. Continuing coverage of Hurricane Dorian next.
With one of the industry's largest catastrophe response teams, State Farm will always be among the first to arrive and the last to leave, to help show that human nature is greater than nature.
North Carolina. In fact, the 3 days on this is edged a little bit farther to the west now. Winds tomorrow at 110, Thursday at 105, and by Friday at 90 miles per hour. So we're still sustaining some strength here, we believe, even through the Carolinas. We're going to be at a Category 2 hurricane here. Again, begins right around the South Carolina-Georgia state line is where that cone first touches a U.S. mainland here and then widens out as we get towards, say, Hatteras here. So Hatteras still in play. The Carolina coast still in play. Even at Charleston to Myrtle Beach, we are still in play for a potential direct hit from this. You can see the eye on the radar now right there very clearly. West Palm Beach, winds are 23, gusting to 33 right now. Melbourne at 22, gust to 31 here. And you'll get lashed with these outer bands for quite some time. Again, it's not a really fast-moving storm. It's faster than yesterday when it was stationary, but the northerly movement is going to have it basically parallel the coast here for the next 24 hours, if not longer than that. Again, the bigger picture here, we're going to see some of those outer bands come through North Florida, and some of those will actually extend even over to the west coast of Florida. The surge issues are going to be on the east coast primarily here, where you've got the onshore flow with the right front quadrant of that system. Now, if you're on the south side from, say, Fort Pierce down to Miami, water actually is going out for you here, so that's not an issue at all. But with the tide cycles, we're going to end up getting some high water here. Beach erosion and water intrusion is very possible for us. Close-up view, you can see the outer bands coming through here off even inland here. So you come maybe even 10 miles inland, you're still getting some rough conditions there, but the highest winds will be right along the beaches here, and you can still see a decent amount of convection there or thunderstorm activity on the western side of Dorian. Tropical storm force winds, by the way, really extend out. This thing has expanded its wind field, so the winds extend out 175 miles from the center, and the hurricane force winds extend out 60 miles from the center. So that often happens when you have this eye wall replacement cycle, which it went through yesterday. You get an expansion of the eye, you get an expansion of the winds, but you get a weaker system. So that's the trade-off that we make right now. Now follow the wind field through the cone, okay? I think this is a really interesting graphic. So this shows you the center point and then where the wind field will be. And notice here, Thursday, 5 o'clock, hurricane force winds certainly possible here around Myrtle Beach up toward Wilmington, with tropical storm force winds extending well inland here. That could be Greensboro, North Carolina, Kinston, North Carolina. These are places where we could experience some very gusty winds. It could be 39 miles per hour or higher. Pretty confident in the forecast track right now, because look at what the model guidance is telling us. Some of our most reliable models are all clustered together. And so this is why we think we have high confidence in what this is going to do. We'll zoom down here toward North Carolina. Still possible we could get a landfall in South Carolina. But I think more likely it would be a skim of South Carolina with really strong onshore flow there. And then just hitting us here, maybe somewhere around Wilmington, up toward Cape Lookout or Hatteras here, and that's going to be an accelerating hurricane too. So that's a good thing. A weakening hurricane, an accelerating hurricane, a glancing blow. We, of course, in North Carolina are no strangers to hurricanes here, Alex, but considering what it's been, this is a totally different animal once it gets there. But having said that, all these susceptible areas on those barrier islands, you need to be ready for this.
Absolutely. You're running out of time to prepare, so now is the time to do that. That's really the story here in Charleston. And we're going to talk to the police chief here in just a moment. I want to get you caught up on what we know right now about Hurricane Dorian. Nearly 3 million Americans are under evacuation orders in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina. The National Hurricane Center has extended watches and warnings up the Carolina coastline. So now 4 states, Florida, Georgia, South and North Carolina, under those warnings. And at least 5 people are dead in the Bahamas on the Abaco Islands. 7 deaths overall from Dorian. Again, the window closing to prepare here in Charleston, South Carolina, in the low country. And the concern really for the water out of this storm, not expected to make landfall, for that center of the storm to cross overland, but it's going to get awfully close. And so we could be looking at a predicted water rise that would be in excess of what we saw in Irma and Matthew. So officials here are saying, if you flooded within the last few years, be prepared to flood again. Luther Reynolds is the police chief here in Charleston, South Carolina, Irma and Matthew. So what we've heard today from a lot of the folks, the officials, the emergency managers, they've been saying, guys, if you flooded here in Charleston or surrounding communities anytime in the past 5 years, now's the time to go, because the likelihood is a very high probability that you're going to flood once again. Mike, looking at some of the effects, the worst of it coming in late Wednesday into late Thursday, but we really think late Wednesday into Thursday afternoon would be those highest gusts, and very concerned about high tide early Thursday morning.
Absolutely, because anytime you can get the maximum push of water coinciding with a high tide, you're going to maximize your flooding, unfortunately. Again, monitoring for Governor Kemp from Georgia to be addressing and stepping up to podium and addressing the public. So we'll monitor that and bring that to you when it happens. But we'll give you the very latest on Dorian. Winds at 110 miles per hour as of the 5 o'clock update. That makes it a Category 2. Winds are down significantly from its peak when it was 185. So we're down 75 miles per hour since then. Northwest movement at 6 miles per hour. So yesterday at this time, if you were watching us, it was stationary. At least we have movement now, and this is expected. Where it's moving to right now is exactly as predicted. And so at this point, paralleling the Florida coastline here, 105 miles east of Vero Beach, Florida here. And so for a lot of you that are watching us from Florida, what you're going to anticipate today is gusty winds, tropical storm force winds, some onshore flow here, a lot of water at the beaches, a lot of water at the water's edge here, and maybe some coastal flooding. And then watch for some sporadic thunderstorms and some outer bands as well. That's the forecast track. It has varied very little. The forecast center line does bring a little, just slightly closer to the North Carolina coastline here. Winds 110, 105, 90. So weakening forecast here through the event, but we cannot completely rule out a landfall in South or North Carolina here, with those areas still in the cone and about half of the cone here in North Carolina here. So I'd be making sure all your preparations are completed today. You've got, say, still time. This is Thursday, expecting it to be off the coast of South Carolina. So that's 2 days from now. So it's not fast. It's moving slowly. You still got time to get some of those last-minute preps done. And I think tomorrow's the day you just kind of sit and wait for it. Then the day to take action is going to be on Thursday. Unless you, of course, need to evacuate, then you need to do that as ordered. As far as the winds go, 31-mile-per-hour gusts in Melbourne. In West Palm Beach, 33 as the eye sits roughly here, 100 to 105 miles just off the coastline here. As I was mentioning, some of those thunderstorms actually contain some lightning. They even extend down into South Florida here, wrap around into Tampa, St. Pete as well. I think you'll see some later on tonight in Jacksonville as well. But as you take a look right at Melbourne, down toward Fort Pierce, down toward Stewart and West Palm, scattered thunderstorms for you and showers. But the real shield, for the most part, has remained off the coast. All right, let's get you up to Jacksonville Beach and Jacksonville with Chris Warren. Chris, it's on the way. It's taking its sweet old time, but we still think it stays just offshore there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, and Mike, two big questions here in Jacksonville. How far offshore and the timing. The timing is key when it comes to the water and the tides.
Rise to greatness.
I ask for your prayers for those in affected areas and for our first responders.
Again, obviously just devastating images there out of the Bahamas, and we're getting more and more information. It's sketchy at this point because communications have been compromised, but we'll get as much information to you as we can. Do want to update you on what's going on in Florida right now, because as a result of Hurricane Dorian, we have a tornado warning now. It does include Brevard County. This is right between Melbourne and Fort Pierce here, right near Sebastian and Vero Beach here. Brevard and Indian River counties are under a tornado warning right now. And anytime you get the meat of the storm, the right front quadrant typically will produce some quick spin-ups of tornadoes. And again, they may happen literally for just seconds, and that's it. But if you look on this, there's nothing discernible on the radar as far as velocities go. They could literally happen between scans, these quick little spin-ups, and be gone. But there's a little bit right up in here that could be headed right down into the Sebastian area. So I'd be taking shelter quickly here in Sebastian as these storms could be rolling on in. All right, I want to switch back over and show you what's going on with the hurricane right now, including a Category 2 with 110-mile-per-hour winds, and it's that western side that could be producing some pretty good thunderstorms with some rotation and tornadoes. So it's just another concern on top of all the other concerns that you have this evening. Northwest movement at 6 miles per hour here. And when you take a look at the eye in this on the radar, I mean, it's still there. It's still very, very solid. But where is this thing headed to? We're going to continue our northwest movement, then a gradual turn to the north, and then the northeast here with the winds coming down each and every step of the way here. They're currently at 110. We think by tomorrow afternoon they may maintain that. They could even maybe weaken a bit more than that. But potential center track comes very, very close here to the South Carolina and North Carolina coast. On the radar, you can see it there, the eye right in the middle of your screen there, and that's about 100 miles just to the west here of Vero Beach. And there again is that tornado warning in the western side of the hurricane tonight. Hurricane alerts here. We've got watches and warnings. They extend from Florida all the way up through North Carolina, a little bit there in Virginia as well. And it's really all a matter of timing and how close does the hurricane get. Why aren't we under hurricane warnings in portions of Georgia? We think at that point the hurricane's probably turning, and the hurricane force winds are projected to be off the coast and not onshore, whereas they could be more onshore in South and North Carolina. As far as the water goes, storm surge potential here is highest in South and North Carolina, where it could be as high as 7 feet in isolated spots here. 2 to 4 feet here in the central east coast of Florida, and then through Georgia and North Florida here, 3 to 5 feet of potential water rise for you, and then water rise at 3 to 5 feet here, storm surge potential. Extreme eastern parts of North Carolina, including the Outer Banks there. But also, winds could be an issue for us. There are already gusts over 50 miles an hour today in Florida, and the potential for power outages will be there from South Florida all the way up through Hampton Roads in Virginia here. So a lot of different areas where you need to make sure that you've taken the necessary precautions for power outages, including flashlights, lanterns, all battery operated. Don't use candles, and make sure if you have a generator, you know how to operate it. Make sure that you have enough gas for it and that it's outside only, and then you run the extension cords into your home and make sure that the exhaust is pointed away from your home and not towards your home. Minimum 15 feet away from your home. Safe operation for it here. Again, most likely areas for power outages, West Palm Beach up toward Jacksonville, and most of those areas will be east of I-95 through Florida, and then well east of I-95 here through Georgia and the Carolinas, but could extend as far inland as near Greenville, North Carolina. So don't want to say that you won't get it inland, but Alex, most likely to see it closer to the coast, closer to where the eye will be.
Yeah, people here preparing for the likelihood of power outages, too, stocking up on the batteries, the lanterns, the flashlights, and, of course, the flooding. That will be a main threat. We're going to talk more about Charleston as well as the entire southeast coast coming up.
Great riches will find you when Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need.
Wow, thanks, Zoltar. How can I ever repay you?
Maybe you could free Zoltar? Thanks, lady. Taxi! Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
This is epic.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
We are live on the ground. Right now, it's coming down.
The Weather Channel.
Hurricane Dorian continues to close in on the southeast United States, and it will bring with it the hazards of damaging wind and also the potential for significant storm surge flooding. One place that we know that is really vulnerable to storm surge flooding, that's Charleston, South Carolina. There could be as much as 3 feet of water rise above normally dry ground in and around the Charleston area. Let me show you what that looks like. Here, for example, imagine 3 feet of water comes in. Well, when that happens, it's too late to evacuate. 3 feet of water can knock you off your feet and also potentially flood the first floors of homes and businesses. It is also possible, depending on the track of Dorian, that we could see water rises even higher than that, maybe as much as 6 feet. That's above my head. Now, that is truly a life-threatening scenario where you'd absolutely have to be on the second floor of a building or a residence in order to survive this kind of outcome. Now, again, remember, Hurricane Dorian's forecast is unknown. Stay tuned for the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center and from the Weather Channel as we go forward.
And right now, our Weather Channel forecast is for up to 7 feet of surge here in Charleston, South Carolina. Here on King Street, it's not necessarily a common spot to flood, but with the forecast that we have for Hurricane Dorian and that forecast water rise, they are expecting even areas that maybe aren't the most prone down near the market. If you are familiar with Charleston at all, the market area just about always floods. Now we get into King Street. It's absolutely plausible that some of these areas will flood. So they've been putting out sandbags. But Mike, I wanted to, bring this up because last week you and Dr. Knabb did a demo on how to properly fill sandbags, and it just goes to show you that even here in Charleston, a city where they're used to it and they had access to it, you can see these ones are just about full. So there are the gaps in between, and we say do it half full, but we say you want to really lay them on their side and overlap the bag, so that way you create more of that seal. So unfortunately here, plenty of areas where should that water rise, it's going to manage to make its way through these businesses. The hope is that this area does not flood, but the knowledge is that it's absolutely plausible given the rainfall forecast and the surge forecast. We've talked to so many people, and I think if you've been watching, you've heard them say, well, we're surrounded by rivers. We've got the Wando, we've got the Ashley River, and the Cooper River. And we've also got Charleston Harbor. We're going to have a strong onshore push of water. So all of that is going to allow that water in the area to rise. So any water that falls isn't going to be making its way out in those rivers, in that harbor, in the ocean. We're just going to have all this water settled in an area that is already very, very low, Mike. So, again, pretty much a slam dunk that the market area is going to flood. And now we have the concern for some of these other areas to flood as well, including these residential areas and these business areas.
You know, I think it's a great point that you just made there, Alex. I mean, when you're doing preps, it's great to do preps, but you got to do them the right way. Don't just put the sandbags down there for show and just hope they do their job. You do it the right way, you're going to get a lot better result.
Yeah, don't want to like call anybody out, but yeah, you went through all the trouble to fill the sandbags, bring them over, set them up. But obviously, you know, if you didn't do it in the right way and you've kind of left some haphazard areas where that water would easily be able to get through, it's not going to take much for that water to get right into that shop.
I mean, you got the play sand that you got from the hardware store. Just don't throw the bags down there. That's not going to be enough. There's a proper way to do it so that you're really maximizing the effect of keeping the water or debris out. There's definitely a way. Want to focus on what the surge could do there, what the water rise could do for you there in the Carolinas and along the southeast coast.